The holiday you're thinking about booking right now could cost you 100 grand. The car you've been eyeing up, that could cost you £500,000. Not the price tag itself, but the actual cost. And I'll show you the exact numbers in a minute. Because here's what nobody tells you. When you're in your 20s earning real money for the first time, every pound you spend right now is worth somewhere between 15 and 20 pounds by the time you retire. And once you realize this, it changes the way you look at everything. I started my first job at 18 on a £29,000 a year salary. That's around $40,000 for anyone watching in the US. And over the past few years, by making some deliberate choices and avoiding some very expensive ones, I've built a net worth of over £112,000 across investments, pension, and cash, all at 22, without a trust fund, without rich parents, and while driving a car that cost me only 1,700 quid. This video is about how and about the decisions most of us make in our 20s that quietly cost us more than we realize. So let's get into it. Here's where things actually stand. In the UK, around 1 in 4 adults have less than £1,000 in savings. And for people in their 20s, it's worse. A huge chunk of basically nothing meaningful saved at all. It's the same case in the US, with data suggesting that half of American adults have $500 or less in their savings account. Pretty scary stats, right? Good thing is that by identifying some of the issues causing this, we can actually work on it. I just want to spend a minute on something that sits inside lifestyle inflation but deserves its own spotlight, because it's one of the sneakiest slow bleeds in personal finance, and that's subscriptions. The average American spends $90 a month on subscriptions, which is over $1,000 a year. In the UK, it's around $800, or roughly £65 a month. And here's the wild part. Most people estimate they spend about half of what they actually do. We genuinely don't even notice. That's because subscriptions are designed to be invisible. It's not one big purchase. It's $9.99 here, $14.99 there, $6.99 for the thing you signed up for during the free trial and never cancelled. Each one feels fine individually, but if you put them all together, they're quietly draining your account every single month. And then there's the gym membership, which deserves special mention in my opinion. I've been training since I was 14 and I genuinely love the gym. But I have a mate who pays £100 a month for a David Lloyd's membership, which is one of the most expensive gym chains here in the UK. Great facilities, spa, classes, the whole shebang. But he actually barely goes. He's basically paying for the idea of going. Brits are estimated to waste over £500 million on unused gym memberships every single year. That's just money gone. Here's my take. Working out is one of the best things you can do for yourself. Genuinely changed my life. But you don't need luxury to lift weights. You just need a barbell, some plates, and a set of dumbbells. A no-frills gym in the UK will probably cost you about £25 a month. The spa isn't going to make you any fitter. So my advice to you is to do a subscription audit. Go through your bank statement and highlight everything recurring. Most people will find at least something that isn't needed, and cancelling that is instant savings. Now let's talk about cars. I currently drive a 2011 Ford Fiesta, and I bought this for 1,700 quid after some haggling. There are genuinely people with more expensive gaming PCs than my car, and myself is included here. And honestly, I'm fine with that. Because here's the thing. That Fiesta will get me from point A to point B. It costs almost nothing to insure, almost nothing to run, and the money I've saved by not financing a £30,000 car is sitting in my investment account growing. That's a trade-off I'm very comfortable with. Now, I'm not saying everyone needs to go as extreme as a 1,700 quid Fiesta. You don't. With 3 to 5 grand, you can get a genuinely solid, reliable car that will serve you well for quite a few years. The ceiling, in my view, if you're serious about building wealth, is somewhere around £10,000 to £15,000, or outright with cash. Above that, and especially if you're leasing or financing a new car, you're actively working against yourself financially. Let me show you why. When I hear about another one of my colleagues buying a new car on finance, trust me, I get it. I love driving, I love road trips, and the temptation for me to buy a nice German car, especially an Audi, is very real for me personally. But let's actually run the numbers. New cars depreciate the moment you drive them off the lot and lose a further 20 to 30% in their first year. An EV, you could lose 40 or even 50% of its value within the first 12 months. It's genuinely one of the fastest ways to destroy wealth that exists. Let's say you buy a new Audi A6 for about £50,000, finance it at 7% over 4 years. You end up paying about 55 grand all in. And here's what most people don't realize. You can actually end up in negative equity. That's basically where you owe more on the car than it's actually worth. You're paying off a £40,000 debt on something maybe only valued at $25,000. You're stuck. You're not able to sell without making a loss. But the real killer is opportunity cost. That £50,000 invested at 25 into the S&P 500 at, let's say, the historical average return of 10% is now worth over 1.5 million by the time you reach retirement age. Even when adjusting for inflation, it's still over £500,000. So you're not spending 50 grand on a car, you're actually spending 1.5 million. That's the actual price tag. And when you start to think like this, you can begin to cut out a lot of the noise and reduce your impulse buying. You can start to invest that same money, ideally as early as possible. And just so you know, here's exactly what my stocks and shares ISA looks like right now, because I think being specific is more useful than being vague. So for starters, I have 75% into VUSA, which is Vanguard's S&P 500 ETF. This basically tracks the 500 biggest companies in America. So in essence, if America does well, I do well. I then have 15% into VOOC, which is Vanguard's FTSE 100 ETF. That's my exposure into the 100 biggest companies in the UK. This index may not have as much capital appreciation as the S&P, but it pays more in dividends, specifically around 3.1% at the time of recording, due to the UK markets having less tech exposure and being dominated by old economy sectors, such as financial services, oil and gas, mining, as well as healthcare. This gives me a more diverse spread rather than the tech-heavy S&P 500, which is dominated by the Magnificent Seven, which makes up over 30% of the index's market capitalization. Lastly, I put 10% into V3AB, which is Vanguard's global all-cap ETF. I do this for broader international diversification across developed and emerging markets. I'm actually considering shifting more into international all-cap ETFs from now on, because I want to reduce how US-centric my portfolio really is. With everything going on geopolitically and economically, having 75% of my investments tied to one country, even if it is the US, feels like concentration risk that's worth investigating. But the structure is quite simple. Low-cost index funds set up as a standing order on payday, invested every single month, regardless of what the market's doing. That's dollar cost averaging, and it's pretty boring. It's not exciting, but it's how ordinary people build extraordinary wealth over time. Set it, forget it. Don't check it every week. Just let it compound. And again, lifestyle inflation is really something that cannot be understated. You land your first proper job, you just got promoted, so you naturally go out to celebrate and you end up spending so much. I started my degree apprenticeship at 18 and I was earning 29 grand a year at the time. It's around $40,000, which if you've never had a salary before, genuinely feels like a fortune. My first paycheck came out to about 2 grand, I believe, and I genuinely thought I'm rich. So I took all my mates out, bought 3 or 4 rounds of Jaeger bombs for everyone. And if you've ever bought shots at a club, you know it's super expensive. I must have spent 300 to 400 quid in just one night, which if you break it down is 15 to 20% of my entire first paycheck. Gone in just a few hours. For something that tasted like medicine, it just wasn't worth it, even if it did give me a nice buzz. And that's exactly how lifestyle inflation starts. Usually, it's not one catastrophic decision, although it is possible. It usually starts with small, seemingly unimportant ones that just quietly add up. You start to eat out more, you go on nicer holidays, and you end up upgrading things that don't need upgrading. None of it feels reckless at the time, but that's exactly the trap. Back to the number from the hook, the holiday that cost 100 grand. When I was 18, fresh into my first job, first proper salary, I went on a lad's holiday to Magaluf in Mallorca. And if you don't know Magaluf, it's basically the poor man's Ibiza. Very loud, messy, and outrageously expensive for what you get. It was absolute carnage from start to finish. I had such a good time. I also got so ill from the partying that I genuinely thought I was going to die at some point. But all in all, I spent over 3 grand in less than a week of being there. 3 weeks later, yes, 3 weeks, I went to Portugal with a different group of mates. That was another 3 grand gone. So within about a year of starting my career, I'd spent over 6 grand on holidays. Now look, I don't fully regret it. I was 18, it was fun, and I did it once and reined it in after that. But even spending 6 grand at 18, rather than investing it, cost me significantly more in the long run. Not saying you shouldn't go on holiday, but please do yourself a favor and budget properly. And then there's my mate who went to the full Euros tournament in Germany in 2024. He spent around £7,000 over 3 months of his salary at the time. He was 21 living at home, so it's not like financially it devastated him, but it was just a bit unnecessary. It's not that he went, it's more so how he went. He went to the full tournament, he had no cost control and no thought about budgeting. And the question isn't whether to live your life or not. The question is, do we know what we're trading when we make these decisions? Because most of us don't. We spend it, figure it out later, and later arrives faster than expected. This point is something that I touched up on in my previous video. I still live at home. I'm basically the only one in my friend group who hasn't lived alone. Most of them went to uni, moved away, and there's now this unspoken assumption that because I'm still at home, I'm somehow behind. And I won't pretend it's always easy. Sometimes when I want to wind down from work, for example, I'll watch something and my dad will just walk in and take over the TV. There are inconveniences. There are days where I think I could just get my own place. But when I zoom out, staying home has saved me roughly $2,000 a month compared to rent, bills, and the general cost of existing independently. Over the past few years, that's a huge part of how I've built my net worth up. I'm actively working towards getting on the property ladder now, which is why I'm holding more cash than usual at the moment. But the foundation, the investments, the pension, the savings, all of that was built by keeping my fixed costs as low as possible for as long as possible. Not saying to not move out. If your job's elsewhere, if you're in a serious relationship, or if your home life is genuinely very difficult, they're all valid reasons. But if it's primarily because it feels like the adult thing to do, that's an expensive feeling. Try and make it a financial decision, not an emotional one. So, to bring it all together, I started at 18 on a £29,000 a year salary. I drove a £1,700 Fiesta, stayed at home, didn't finance a car, invested consistently, and made some very expensive mistakes along the way. Holidays in Mallorca, Portugal, far too many Jaeger bombs. But I learned from them and adjusted. The result was that a few years later, I'm now sat with a net worth of 112 grand. That's not me bragging. That's me showing you what's possible when you take the boring route seriously, while still actually living your life and enjoying luxuries, just in moderation. So the biggest financial mistake in our 20s isn't just one thing. It's the combination of things like lifestyle inflation eating up our income, subscriptions that quietly bleed money, holidays that always go over budget, a car that's a status symbol but costs $500,000 in future wealth, and moving out before we're financially ready because of social pressure. Our 20s are the only window where responsibilities are quite low, flexibility's high, and the future upside is massive. The decisions we make now compound in either direction. So please save and invest in your future. Don't waste this window.